This is a presentation about the background of the English colonization and settlement of North America. And we're going to deal with two questions. One, why didn't they do it earlier? They were kind of late in the game to settle in North America. And secondly, when they did settle, why did they do it then? Let's take a look at that. They didn't explore earlier for a number of reasons. A couple of the major ones are, first of all, religious turmoil. The English Reformation was going on. Henry VIII, if you remember, was interested in getting a male heir to the throne, and his wife was getting too old to be able to do that. So he asked the Pope for a divorce. The Pope said no, and Henry VIII broke away from the Church at Rome and began his own church, which we know as the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. The equivalent in the United States is called the Episcopal Church. Okay, so this created deep divisions within England, a lot of conflict, and he finally did get his male heir to the throne, his son, who became King Edward VI, but he was a boy, was very sickly, and he died before reaching full adulthood in 1553. Then Henry's older daughter, Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, ruled for 5 years, but she was a Catholic. And by this time, the English church had already broken from the Roman Catholic Church. Mary tried to return England to Catholicism. She became known as Bloody Mary. She died in 1558. So during this time when the Spanish were busy colonizing the New World, the English were sort of out of the game on that. Then his second daughter, Elizabeth, actually brought stability back to the English throne. She ruled for 45 years, and it was under Elizabeth that some changes started to happen. But there was also another problem, and that is that the most powerful naval force in the world belonged to Spain. You have to realize that if you want to colonize the New World, it's not just a question of getting, one or two or three ships over there. What you need to do to maintain a successful colony is to have a steady stream of ships going in both directions, bringing supplies and new settlers to the colony and returning to the parent country with goods, with products from the colony. And maintaining that traffic on the Atlantic was going to be very difficult with the naval power that Spain had. But in 1588, the Spanish Armada, this enormous fleet of ships, was defeated by the English Navy, the Royal Navy, and that opened the door for a great deal more English traffic across the Atlantic. Okay, now, when those opportunities arose, what did England want, and why did they want it? Well, there was a very famous writer of the time by the name of Richard Hakluyt, and he wrote something like 23 different reasons why England should colonize North America. Let me just give you some of them. He said this would strike a blow against their archenemy Spain, who of course had colonies in the Western Hemisphere, present-day Mexico, the Caribbean, South America. This would give England a chance to convert people to Christianity, but to a particular version of Christianity. Spain was a Catholic country. England now was not a Catholic country, so they wanted to convert people not to Catholicism, but to Anglican Christianity. Hakluyt also believed that establishing an empire would elevate England to a position of wealth and power on the world stage. And he turned out to be right about that, because in the decades and centuries to come, England would become the most powerful imperial power in the world. The saying went that the sun never set on the British Empire, but that's down the road from where we are now. Now, one of the two major traditional purposes of a colony is to provide goods, natural resources, raw materials, and simply processed crops like sugar or tobacco to the parent country, to England. And at the same time, colonizing other areas would create markets, places where England could sell its manufactured goods. For example, if they imported lumber from the New World, they could turn that lumber into furniture and send the furniture back where people could buy it. So this would be a road to economic growth. There's one more important reason that we need to add, and that is to move out some of England's surplus population. They were already sending people to Ireland, sending people to the Caribbean, but we're going to be most interested in their tendency to send people to their mainland colonies in British North America, what we know as the United States, the Eastern United States. And the best example of that is, of course, the colony of Virginia in the early going. Okay, now let's go into this issue of surplus population a little more deeply. First of all, why did England have a population surplus? Well, one reason for this, not the only one, but one reason is something called the Enclosure system. Now, this is a process that went on for centuries, but we can understand it if we look at this drawing of an English manor of the Middle Ages. You notice all those orange and white strips there. Those are farms for small farmers, peasant farmers. And they're too small to be able to operate a fully self-sufficient farm. So in order to make it as farmers in this kind of a situation, you needed common pasture land, which you see up in the green area here. And you needed forests for wood to be used for cooking food, for heating homes. So in other words, there were some parts of this manor that were available for everybody. These were common lands. Now, these farmers depended on those common lands. They couldn't make it without them. Now, this is just sort of a schematic drawing of the difference between a typical English community, a farming village, before enclosure and then after enclosure. You'll notice on the left, you have lots of little rectangles of different colors. They represent the farms of many small farmers. And you have a lot of common land in green. But on the right, after the enclosure movement had taken its course in this farming village, you had the baron's land. That was the medieval lord in blue, and rich farmers' lands either in orange or in purple, and that forced out the small farmers because these common areas like common pasture land for grazing animals were taken over and enclosed or fenced in and taken over by the large landowners. That left no way for farmers to make a go of it. And they had no choice but to sell their property at very low prices. Now, to give you an idea here, there were traditional rights that English farmers had. These are very old-fashioned terms. You almost never hear them anymore. But they had, for example, a common of pasture, which is a right to graze their animals on that land. A common of estovers, the right to take wood for various purposes. A common of turbary, the right to cut turf or peat for fuel. Common of piscary, which is a right to take fish from lakes or streams to supplement your food. A common in the soil, sand, gravel, etc., and finally a common in pannage, the right to graze pigs on acorns and beech mast. These are very old, very traditional rights, but they were gradually being taken over during the enclosure movement. So these common lands were sold to private owners, and Parliament was involved in this process. Peasant farmers who depended on these lands had no choice but to sell them to large farmers. And then what were they going to do? They could work for very low wages for some of the large landowners to become hired hands on farms rather than farmers with their own land. Now this did help the efficiency of agriculture. More food was produced, but at a terrible cost for the rural poor, the peasant farmers. And a lot of them then moved to cities and towns, and this created a surplus of people, overpopulation in the cities, especially the city that by far was the largest in England, namely London. And if you think about the effect on the city of London of poor, angry, rowdy, mostly young men who were very, very unhappy with the situation, this is not exactly a recipe for social peace. So the government wanted to send them away somewhere. And one of the places they sent them away was Virginia.